One of the most common things people are curious about when they're trying to become pregnant, or actually when we're also trying to avoid pregnancy, are the most common signs of pregnancy. So I thought I would give us a breakdown of what those things are. So obviously, the most obvious symptom of pregnancy is a positive pregnancy test. That is really the best way to tell if we are pregnant, which is why when I sometimes get questions about like discharge, does this mean I'm pregnant? Does that? I probably sound irritating, but I tell women, go take a pregnancy test because that's the most obvious. And and honestly, a lot of women don't start experiencing many of the symptoms that I'm going to go over until they've already taken that positive pregnancy test. Especially, if you're trying to get pregnant, you've been taking pregnancy tests since you ovulated, that you're going to probably be taking a pregnancy test like the first day that your HCG levels are high enough to be detected on a test. But with that said, these early signs of pregnancy that I'm going to go over can be reaffirming in some ways, letting you know that yes, that your HCG levels are continuing to rise, because a lot of times the hormone shifts that we experience in pregnancy are what cause these symptoms. So even though the symptoms can be uncomfortable, they can also be reassuring. And if you're experiencing these symptoms and you are really uncomfortable, I have 2 videos full of tips about what to do about them. All right, the first one, and obviously this is a no-brainer, is a missed period. Of course, a missed period does not always mean that you are pregnant, because various things can cause women to have their period come late or to skip it altogether. So a missed period is not always a sign of pregnancy, but when you're trying to become pregnant, oftentimes that missed period is very exciting. If, and this is especially true, so okay, I'll tell a story. After my miscarriage, trying to get pregnant, around Christmas, my period was late. I missed it. I was so excited, but I kept taking pregnancy tests and they kept being negative. A week later, I got my period. So, a lot of times if it's just a couple days late and you're still not getting that positive test, maybe the HCG levels aren't high enough, but it could also mean that your cycle length has just changed. And that's what happened with me. It just ended up extending 5 days for a couple of months. But if more than a week has passed without the start of your period, especially if your cycle is typically regular, you might be pregnant, but take that pregnancy test. Again, that's the best way to know. And this is one symptom that can come before the positive pregnancy test, but they usually occur around the same time. Like for me, when I finally became pregnant, I took the positive pregnancy test the day after my period was set to arrive, and it was positive. Okay, another one is frequent urination. Once you conceive, the amount of blood in your body increases. And as your kidneys work to process this increased amount of fluid moving through the body, you'll have a more frequent urge to urinate because there'll be more for the body to expel. Swollen or tender breasts. This is one that a lot of women experience in early pregnancy. Those hormones, they can cause increased sensitivity, soreness in the breasts. The discomfort is usually not permanent. For a lot of women, like a couple weeks into pregnancy, actually, the swollen or the tender breasts go away. Usually our breasts do continue to get a bit bigger, preparing for breastfeeding, but they usually don't hurt as much as they do in those first few weeks of pregnancy. Fatigue is incredibly common. This is caused by an increase in progesterone, and a lot of times it can taper off after the first trimester. So hopefully you're not going to be pregnant. Hopefully you're not going to be really tired the whole pregnancy. Nausea with or without vomiting can be really common. researchers are starting to look into, you know, whether the like extreme nausea that some women experience is due to like high levels of HCG. And so sometimes, you know, people say, oh, it's exciting that you're nauseous because it means you're really, really pregnant. With that said, not having nausea does not mean that you're not having a healthy pregnancy. So that is that. Light spotting and cramping. This one can be really scary for some women because obviously we associate cramping and light spotting with our period starting, right? Or for people that have already been pregnant for a while, this makes us, or, you know, for like a week or so, we've already had that positive pregnancy test and now we're having some cramping, some bleeding. This can make us think that we're having a miscarriage. But do not think that you're absolutely having a miscarriage because that's not always the case. So light spotting, it can also be known as implantation bleeding, and this can occur when the fertilized egg attaches to the uterine lining, and this can trigger a little bit of bleeding. This can happen about 10 to 14 days after conception, usually around that same time where you're going to have a missed period. So that can be confusing, right? Around the time you're supposed to have the period, you have some bleeding, you think you're having the period, but it doesn't get heavier. And that's a telltale sign. The bleeding doesn't continue, it doesn't get heavier. And it can also be accompanied by some cramping that can be caused from that embryo implanting. Bloating, again, the hormones, they can lead to more bloating. So similar to the bloating we can experience before a period. And that's why a lot of these symptoms can be really frustrating for women, because oftentimes the same symptoms that we experience before a period are also the symptoms that we experience leading up to a pregnancy. But a key difference is, like I said earlier, a lot of times these symptoms aren't going to show up, at least in a very noticeable way, until really after you have that missed period and your hormones are really starting to shift. Whereas if you're having a lot of these symptoms, you know, in between ovulation and when your period's supposed to start, potentially they're actually more of a sign of PMS and that you're getting closer to having your period, but not always. Mood swings, once your hormone levels begin to rise, you might find yourself more emotional, more subject to those mood swings. Constipation, progesterone, it can really slow down the digestive system, causing constipation. Food aversions and sensitivity to smell, that can be a big one, and that can be really connected to the nausea. And you might find that, your taste for certain foods changes. Like literally, some foods might taste different than they usually do to you. Like a food that used to taste amazing, it was your favorite, now when you eat it, it's just the worst. Like for me, and this was so sad for me, anything that was sweet, I couldn't handle it. Like Ben and Jerry's. Like usually I could down a pint of Ben and Jerry's in a night. Couldn't stomach it. Any sweet salad dressings, nothing with sugar. So you might have that. And for a lot of women, like the fridge, just so gross. Okay, so any of the signs above, they can mean that you're pregnant, but I want to note that plenty of women get pregnant and have little or even no symptoms. So again, just because you're not having these symptoms does not mean you're not pregnant, or if you've already taken the positive pregnancy test, it does not mean you're not having a healthy pregnancy test. Again, so you don't have to experience all 10 to be pregnant. And even after you take a at-home pregnancy test, you can get further confirmation of the pregnancy by checking in with your care provider. They can do a urine, a blood test in their office, but typically they're not going to do an ultrasound until maybe around 9 weeks. Sometimes they will do it around 6 weeks if you've had a miscarriage or pregnancy loss and you're really anxious to see that heartbeat. But sometimes the heartbeat doesn't show up until, after that 6-week mark. So discuss those options with your care provider. And that's about it. If you have comments, please let me know. And if you can like and subscribe, that is incredibly helpful. It supports me in continuing to provide this content. All right. Love you guys.